We can have a coaching toolkit that's very robust. We can have lots of tools in our toolkit for coaching. But really, the key to making sure that classrooms are equitable is making sure that all of the members of the community of that classroom see themselves in the classroom, that everybody is included, everyone's voices are included. And sometimes, because classrooms are so dynamic, there's different students. Sometimes there's different students on different days. Sometimes classes are expanding or contracting based on what's happening with staffing or enrollment in a school. It can be really hard to build community. But for early career teachers who want to develop equity-focused practices, the very first step is figuring out how to build community and how to bring all of the students into that community. We can have the best coaching tools in our toolkit, but if we're not supporting an early career teacher to find ways to build community in their classroom, most of our coaching tools are not going to be impactful. What we need to do is we need to think about, in what ways are students engaged in learning and growing in this classroom? How do students feel safe and included? How does the curriculum reflect and draw on and appreciate students' languages, their cultures, their identities, their individual ways of being in the world, their families and their communities, and looking for those places where we see that happening, and then asking, okay, so why is that happening in relation to some students and not others? So sometimes the teacher has to turn the lens back on themselves and say that perhaps their racial identity, and this is not just about white teachers, all teachers can reflect on how their racial identity might allow them or provide them space to connect with some students more than others. And sometimes we have deficit views of students that we didn't even know that we had. And so doing some digging into, what is it that I'm bringing into this space? Who am I? And how do my identities provide me access to building relationships or creating spaces for some students, but maybe make it harder for others? And then the second piece is to identify what are some of the practices of community that are helping students to relate well to one another and supporting students in building strong relationships, like cooperative learning strategies, group work, conferencing between peers. What are some of the ways that we can use different structures in the classroom to help students to connect with one another? And then to, of course, look at materials, curriculum, look at the books, look at the texts that are in the classroom and who's reflected and whose identities are present in those materials and whose are not, right? And how do we make shifts around curriculum materials, texts that bring more students into the classroom? So those are just some of the beginning steps in thinking with an early career teacher about bringing equity to the center of the teaching practices. And then there's one more that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is that early career teachers are coming into a system as newcomers. And there's a theory called communities of practice and an idea called legitimate peripheral participation. And this is by Levin Wenger. Sometimes when early career teachers start working in schools, they are being apprenticed into a community of practice by listening, by participating, by learning. And in doing so, they become more central members of that community. But there are some implicit aspects of structures and systems that you cannot learn necessarily through just participating. So there are some structures where we have to really explicitly talk about what's happening within the system and why is it producing the outcomes that it's producing. So testing and accountability are examples of parts of systems that need to be really explicitly examined and unpacked with early career teachers so they understand the different roles and responsibilities that folks have, the goals, the practices, and really have sort of an explicit understanding about how all of those pieces work together within the system to produce a particular set of outcomes, such as curriculum standardization, frequent student assessments, and so on. So to really understand systems and unpack them can be a really powerful part of coaching and is related to bringing our practices closer to equity, but is often one of the pieces that we leave behind because we're so focused on the immediate. We're so focused on the classroom life that we forget to sort of address these larger systems.